Move into the general discussion. I know there were some questions in the chat, and we can also have questions in the room as well. Carl, do you want to go ahead and start with the chat questions?
Yes, of course. So there was a question for our one of the previous speakers, for Dana Westcott. Jacob Richardson was asking, could you use current topography in conjunction with your model to estimate devolatilized depth?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things, I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but one of the things that I am looking at is like looking at, you know, how much variability there is in the topography, looking at surface roughness and other factors and seeing if there's a correlation between that and the amount of ice left in the simulations. I've been looking at it. I haven't seen, nothing's jumped out at me yet that's been a good correlation. So I think there's still more work I need to do there.
And Dana, before you go, as a follow-up, Jacob Richardson pointed out that a GPR on the surface could get down to 5 meters. And it makes me think of what Tony Colapre was talking about yesterday, where with Viper, we'll be able to see down about 5 meters. So does that play into your modeling at all?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can use the output from the model to simulate any observation, basically. And so, you know, if you give me the parameters of, you know, what constitutes a detection for any instrument, I'm happy to factor that into the model.
Great. Thank you. Next, go ahead. Yep.
Hi, my name is Kayla Barry from NASA Goddard. And Jennifer, I have a question for you. Thank you for the talk. I really appreciated hearing a little bit about your team's public engagement strategy. And I was wondering, with the VR, AR content that you're working on, are there plans to make any of that content, parallel versions of that content, available through a regular web browser?
Yes, that's the goal, to make it as accessible and easy to access as possible. So right now, the MIT group is doing the back end work. We're developing, you know, we're doing the hardware testing for the camera systems, and we're actually flight qualifying those cameras right now. And then in parallel, developing the software to make the pipeline to send that out. So the development work is being done now, but that's absolutely the idea, is to bring it to the world.
It's really exciting. Thank you so much.
Sure, thanks. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the room or online. Oh, one more. Okay, go ahead. We'll do one more question before we go to break.
Yeah, I actually had another question for you. I'm really curious about the whole smoothing of the PSRs. And I was curious, is there just a correlation between that smoothing and the temperature, or is there a correlation with other data sets as well?
Yeah, Ariel's taking a look at that, and also looking across multiple craters and in shadow and not in shadow, and polar craters and not polar craters. And it seems to be driven by temperature. Okay. It's very well correlated with that 112K isotherm. So it's a mystery. It's very curious. So the paper that's been published is focused on the data analysis and whatnot. And we need to go more into that and figure out the physics behind it. But
yeah, does that potentially say something about the depth of that ice that smoothing is coming
Yes, from? It potentially does, because if you've got tens of meters of ice, is that having some effect on the surface, which I naively wouldn't have expected, because it's so cold and it's so hard to get materials to move and to flow. Like, it makes sense on the Earth, it makes sense on Mars. And so this correlation with temperature on the moon is very surprising. And this is also one of the areas where I think that Valentin Bickel's work, being able to peer into the PSRs and see what's really going on there, is also going to help try and unravel these mysteries. So,
yeah, really interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
Again, a question for Dana. What range of geotechnical characteristics do you take into account for the actual surface being impacted? I think in terms of what Jen talked about in terms of the smoothing in the areas, and also in terms of the fairy castle structures that we had talked about in the past. And we've seen from Jim Head discussions of within IMPs how cratering could possibly be very modified by very unusual geotechnical characteristics. So how might that all factor into your modeling?
Yeah. Dana, you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, until I have any data that show that I should use a different crater shape in the polar regions, which I guess there may be some. Lior's paper, I think, talks about the crater shape, but I just use a standard crater shape in my calculations.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming to this session. We'll now conclude. Thanks to all our speakers and for everyone for participating both in person and online.